Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Balaur Arms Knights Templar sword, and this particular one was made in collaboration with LK Chen. I don't know if they've made this model before. I know some of them have gone through different makers. The one that I have was manufactured by LK Chen in collaboration with Balaur Arms. And before I get into the review, a couple quick notes and caveats. One, it's a review sample. It was sent to me by the folks at Cult of Athena. If you think that makes me biased because I didn't spend any money on it, you know at the start. I do want to note I actually reached out to the folks at Cult of Athena and requested a sample of some kind to review. I didn't really care what it was so long as it wasn't a katana. Not that I don't love katana, but I have a lot of those samples to review, and it's nice to mix something up, and it also keeps things fresh for me. I like to learn about our other sharp, shiny things, so they sent this one my way. I didn't necessarily pick it, but I'll let you know, boy, am I glad they did, because this is not a sword that initially, when they said this is what we're sending, that I'm overly excited to review. I've handled other swords I thought like it, or at least I've handled some that look in, relative proximity to it, but this one really delighted me, and I'm going to be very pedantic and nitpicky about the sword. I'm going to say a lot of negative things, but I don't want you to take any of those as me saying this is a bad sword. It's a great sword, and I really like it, which I'll probably explain better at the end. So hopefully you stick around till then, because I don't want you to walk away from this review hearing me, nitpick about little odds and ends and think that it's in any way a bad sword. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler, but on with the rest of the caveats. They sent it my way. I'm reviewing it now, and as you can tell, I probably like it. The other bit you should know is I don't study historic European martial arts. I do study other styles of martial arts, but none that involve this particular type of sword. So as I move it around, no, I'm not a scholar in the subject. I'm just an enthusiast that likes cutting stuff with swords in the backyard. Now, I've done this for a minute. I've talked about swords on the internet. I've collected them for a long time. Hopefully that gives me some hands-on experience that's useful to you, but do know I don't fancy myself an expert in the subject. Anyway, the sword is right around $400 if you were to buy one new from Cult of Athena, if they're available. I know sometimes they go on order or back order or pre-order. Anyway, if you can get one, they're around about $400. This one, again, is made in collaboration with LK Chen. I think that's who they're using currently. I don't know if it'll stay that way, but I do know some of the Balaur arms are manufactured by different entities out there. The ones by LK Chen seem to really hit the nail on the head a little bit more. So I hope they stick around with them, because there's a lot more positive to say about this one than negative. Speaking of what I'm going to say, I'll talk about the bits and bobs, fits and features, give you some close-ups of the build quality and stuff so you have some idea what to expect if you buy one of these and pull it out of the box. The other thing I'll do is I'll move it around. I'll talk about the experience in moving it around. I'll put measurements and all that kind of stuff in the description down below if you're interested in that. I'll cut with it as well. This one I'm not going to abuse. I did abuse the LK Chen messer that was sent to me a while ago that gave me some idea of what to expect from the Crossguard and all of that kind of stuff. But I like the sword. I don't really want to break it, and it's also relatively thin. So if I smash it into a metal pole, I don't imagine it's going to survive a lot. It will likely take damage. This one doesn't seem like it's easy to break. I've done some quasi-abusive things with it, but I'm not going to intentionally try to break it unless you change my mind about that. I know that's my typical shtick on YouTube. If you would find value in me pushing it to failure, please let me know, though I'll note that this is a relatively thin arming sword, and so I would imagine if I smash it into metal, it is going to diminish quickly. Those are my... That's what I would guess anyway. But at the end of doing all of that, I will tell you if I personally think it's worth it or not. Hopefully by that point, though, you know enough to decide if it's worth your hard-earned $400 or not. Anyway, if you want to know measurements, want links, all that's in the description. I'm going to move on with the review. When I do these reviews, I go soup to nuts, top to bottom, and I talk about the pommel first, and I start right at the peen end here. So this is not poorly done. There's nothing problematic with it in the sense that it catches on me. There's no jagged edges, and sometimes in swords at the $400 price point, that is not something you can take for granted. They are often haphazardly done, have tool markings or things like that. They look like they've been maybe a little bit more percussively maintenance than you would hope for, and sometimes they have sharp bits sticking out that can snag on your skin and then are not properly sanded down. This looks to be both functional. It looks sandwiched over and not ground down to the point that it doesn't actually serve its purpose anymore. And it doesn't have any sharp bits on it, but it does look a little bit ugly. So there are some swords round about this price point that have done this a little bit cleaner. I wouldn't give any particular grievance to this. There are no giant tool markings. It doesn't look like it's been smushed. There's nothing sharp. From a practical standpoint, this is exceeding expectations, but there is opportunity for improvement here. It could just be a little bit cleaner. Not sure exactly how to do that. I know if I tried to tighten this up with a hammer, I would miss it and probably put a big gouge in it, and it would be spectacularly awful. But better skilled hands could perhaps do this just a little bit better. As it is, though, everything is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like I said, it appears to be large enough to be functional. It doesn't cut my hands, and there are no giant gouges or anything like that around it. So overall, reasonably good job here. Now the pommel as well does have some dings in it, and the recessed area here has a little bit of a, I don't know, lackluster surface that isn't as refined as it could be. Now you could find a coin to put in there, you could paint it, you could put stuff in there yourself. The ledge on the inside of this ring as well is a little sharper than the rest, not so much actually that I can cut myself on it. Again, with swords in this kind of lower end or middle tier, this is something that you don't necessarily expect. Oftentimes there are sharp little ledges on here that catch. But anyway, the surface could be pitted a little differently, or stippled, I think is the texture that it's called. And if it were done just a little bit more evenly, or even if it were routed out and a little cleaner, I wouldn't necessarily mind it. It's not a bad thing though, and I know a lot of people who dress this up by putting a coin or a medallion or some other such thing in there. The other thing I would note about this kind of pommel area is that it has some tapering to it. It tapers down just a little bit, and there's not any other sword in this price category that I can think of that does that. I can't think of a single one. As you go up in the price points to the Albions and such, then you start to get some dimension in this pommel area here. This one is at $400, the only one I've seen that has taken the effort to put a little bit of dimension in this wheel pommel. I absolutely love to see it. It outshines all of the other things that I just said, like, all right, you know, little extra mark here, a little texture there, a little sharp ledge, whatever. Putting dimension in here is A+ level on any sword. Having this level of attention, putting it on a sword in $400 is really unexpected. It's just a little sanding. It's not hard to do, but nobody else seems to do it, and I'm happy to see it here. Also, I think the edges around here look clean and crisp. At the same time, they're not sharp. They don't hurt my hands. If I grab this wheel pommel, I don't necessarily like wheel pommels. You should know I complain about them often and how they hurt my hand. This one does not feel terribly uncomfortable. None of the ledges or anything really bite me, except for the inner ledge here, and that's only ever so slightly. Nothing caused me to draw blood or ripped my gloves apart or anything like that. But anyway, the surfaces are rounded off in such a way where they still look crisp, but at the same time don't wreck my hands. So that's much appreciated as well. Anyway, this wheel pommel, such as it is part of the design, and I just absolutely love to see that it has some dimension. It looks like it's just been sanded down a little bit, but even that just adds a level of authenticity that you see in some museum pieces, that you see in higher end replicas. Love to see that done here, and it doesn't feel bad in my hand. I don't know if that's a result. It's more, I think, the chamfering of the edges or slight rounding of the edges without losing the detail, but it doesn't jut into the fluff of my hand as uncomfortably as many others often do. Anyway, that's the pommel here. The other thing I'm going to mention about the pommel, though, is that the materials that LK Chen uses for the pommel and the crossguard are different somehow. And odd as it is, they don't hold the same temperature as other things, so they feel like warmer to the touch than some of the other pommel things that I was holding up examples and doing comparisons between them, and others felt like colder than this one did. And it has like a lighter feeling and sound to it than some of the others. Not like it's something plasteel or something. Like it doesn't feel plastic. It is metal, but at the same time, it doesn't have the same density, it feels like, as maybe some of the other steels. I'm not sure what alloy they use. It seems sufficient to do sword-related things. The crossguards hold up to some aggressive strikes that I did on a different sword made of the same material, or at least what I'm guessing is the same material. But it doesn't feel quite the same. It doesn't hold the same temperature. It feels lighter somehow. And anyway, so food for thought there. I don't think that's anything really important, good or bad, that seems to serve a practical purpose, but just an observation that I thought I would note. Anyway, as I move up to the transition between the grip and the pommel, this is where I also have a little bit of nitpick. So the leather is cut away in such a way that it doesn't leave, bulbous flaps and nastiness and residue or schmutz. At the same time, it's cut away in a way that left very minor tool marks and left some of the original color of the leather exposed. And quite often when these leather grips are done, that isn't the case. You don't see the original leather cut away. The lacquer that covers it or stain is left, and I'm not exactly sure how it's done. At the same time, I don't see like the original leather cover or cutaway bits on here. I think they're maybe taped or something when they apply the paint or lacquer, not entirely sure. But in this case, I can make out the areas that were cut away. It's somewhat unsightly. I have to really look to notice it. It doesn't seem to impact anything. There were no sharp ledges left from the leather or anything. At the same time, if this had like a little retouch of color or something like that, that would be appreciated. Apart from that, though, I do see some minor scuffs on here. Very, very minor. Again, I'm being very nitpicky. I've seen much worse grips. I want to preface in $400. I've seen things that have bulbous chunks that stick out, or that meet a flat point, or that overlap, or that are rusted, or that are full of debris and other building materials. None of that is present here. It is just a little bit of a seam that I can see that was cut away. Overall, that's still really impressive, but it is an opportunity for improvement. So then I'm going to move up to this grip area here. This, for a sword made in China, that is, it's great. So often swords in this price point really miss the mark in grips, and there are opportunities for improvement here. It doesn't have like a swell in the center that I think would fill my palm a little better. It doesn't have, you know, much in the way of dimension, but it is elliptical. It does fit my hand well. I can index it really well. It's not too big, it's not too narrow. Oftentimes these seem to be like really bulbous or super thin. They've got a overall good size here, a little bit on the smaller side, but even my big sausage fingers seem to like it. There's opportunity for the shape here, but what I do see is what looks like cord wrapped around. I'm not sure exactly how it's constructed. It's wrapped in leather. There are little risers here that add to the aesthetic, and the seam is reasonably well placed. I can feel it, I can see it. It's hard to see though, and I can't get like a fingernail into it to peel it. And that's all important stuff, because sometimes that's the case. The cords, sometimes they're bound in, come unwound, or they leave little things on there that would allow them to diminish or unravel over time. I don't see any of that here. I've spent a fair amount of time swinging it around and playing with it, handling it as well, and nothing has come undone or loosened, despite my efforts to kind of casually get a fingernail in there and pry at it if it becomes available. And so overall, it's held up well. Like I said, I do think there's opportunity to add a bit of swell and dimension here, but still, this risers, this kind of patterning with a cord wrap, the coloration overall is really much better than I often see from forges out of China. It seems like grips and hilts in general are often missed out of the forges in China, and this one seems like it's made by folks who have an eye for history and what the competition is doing, and are looking to make a good sword. The hilt as well, I do want to say that the leather feels supple in a way. Oftentimes these guards feel a little bit more rigid, a little harder in terms of the way they're made. This feels like the leather that they're using is soft or tanned in a way that it's not as like rawhide as you might hope to be on a grip. I don't really notice it. I have to, this came from an observation from handling a number of other arming swords with different grips, and this one just has a little bit cushier a feel to it. Not so much that it feels like I have to hunker down on it, or that it's going to lose my grip, or that I don't have a good kind of purchase on the sword, but it does feel, it's a little bit more recliner leather than like rawhide leather in terms of feel, just a little bit. Moving up to this transition on the crossguard, again, I see this area that's been cut away. Fewer tool marks, admittedly, but I do see the same cutaway that I did around the pommel area. Would just like it if that was touched up in some way, but again, very nitpicky here. That brings us up to the crossguard. So the crossguard is got some dings on it, and I want to preface that those are from me. So when I got this sword, I took it out of the scabbard. Later, when I put it back in, it got stuck in the scabbard, and to get it out, I had to bang on it with a hammer to get it out. And I'll talk about that, but I do want to mention the folks at Cult of Athena very graciously went out and inspected their inventory and validated that all of them come in and out of the scabbard correctly. So this is an oddity. I don't know if it's the weather. It's been weird lately. But mine got stuck in the scabbard. I'll talk about that more with the scabbard. It's where the dings came from. I hit it with a hammer to get it out. It's not going to be a problem for you, though. They inspected the inventory. All of them draw and sheath, and they sent me video proof of them doing that. Much appreciated, and I love that they went the extra mile to go do that and make sure that that is not something that's happening systemically with the lot. Very glad to hear. Anyway, Crossguard, disregard the dings on it. It has a little bit of shape. It's more or less square, but it does have some swell and curve to it. Again, nothing bites my hands. This looks reasonably crisp to me, crisp as it needs to, but if I really choke up on the guard and get the flub of my hand up here and move it around, nothing bites into my hand. And overall, that is really much appreciated. Oftentimes in the effort to make these things look good, they're still left sharp. That wasn't done here. Overall good. And one thing I neglected to do with the grip was hold on to it and grab this quillin and twist it. And honestly, I can't really move it. It indexes well in my hand and doesn't twist around. One thing I like to do with these swords is kind of grab them, white knuckle them, or hold them really hard is what that means, and then grab the quillin and try to twist it. And if I can easily twist it in my hand, then that means when I impact a hard object like a branch or like the croquet stake of doom often, it's going to twist and adjust in my hand. Now, if you sail right through your target, you don't necessarily notice it, but if you cut harder things where a lot of vibration goes into your hand, then you will notice it, and you might have to adjust your grip. You might lose your edge alignment. This locks in pretty good. I can twist it just ever so slightly. If the grip were a little bit bigger or maybe had some swells that fill in some of the voids in my hand, that might help, but overall it still stays pretty secure. Continuing with the details on the crossguard here, there's a little cross recessed in on either side. It looks like it's cut in with a laser rather than chiseled in, but it is recessed. It's actually kind of like etched, not just a surface etched. It has like a texture to it. It's in there like a 0.5 millimeter or so. The other bit I want to mention is the gap in the crossguard here. So it is as clean as I've seen on any sword. This is a level of attention to detail I really only see in Albions and high-end customs, and not always even this good. This is as clean as you can really hope to get it. There's not really any gap present except for where the fuller runs into the handle. Overall, this is an absolutely excellent execution of this kind of where the blade meets the crossguard thing. Now, historically, sometimes they were flush and sometimes they weren't, and I would imagine often not, because it's very hard to do. But in a modern reproduction, it's something I absolutely love to see. I always bitch about it, and it's just a rare treat to see that done here. So tip of my hat to LK Chen, gold star for doing that. Anyway, the crossguard has some dimension. It looks okay, but the real star for me is that gap in the crossguard. I know that's something that is a nuance of sword reviewer YouTube thing, but it's just a mark of quality here and attention to detail that I really, really appreciate seeing. I'm going to move on to the scabbard now, and elephant in the room here is that this one binds, and it doesn't go all the way in, and it has gradually shrunk. It was all the way in when I received it from Cult of Athena, I think, or maybe it was sticking out a little bit. After I took it out, I put it back in as far as it would go, but it stuck out a little bit, and then it got even, I don't know, it shrunk more, and as I mentioned, I had to hit the crossguard with a hammer to get it to release. Now, it gets stuck, I want to say, about 3 or 4 inches before it will go into the scabbard, and because it's a relatively small area, I really can't do much other than break the scabbard to get it to fit, which is a very big disappointment. So the scabbard basically can't be used as a scabbard right now, and is going to require some major surgery in order to be used. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not a systemic problem. Cult of Athena went out, unwrapped the inventory, checked it, and validated that the ones that they have do not have the same problem. So really appreciate them doing that. It is a disappointment here, but if this happened to you, then you would likely be able to send it back for one that does not have this problem, or perhaps you're handier than I am and it would be an easy fix for you, though I don't exactly see how it would be easy. Moving on from that, though, the scabbard has a leather covering on it, and this feels to be some sort of genuine leather, but again, it feels soft and supple, and so if I push on it, the surface, like the top layer of the leather, or the top of the leather, moves around just a little bit, while the bottom feels snug and glued onto the scabbard, but it feels like it's tanned in a way that may not be as much as you would hope for in a scabbard. So I don't know if they have limitations on leather products or something, but this is something I commonly see out of swords in China. It'd be ideal to use a different type of leather, I think, for the scabbard. It's not a problem, but it just has kind of a weird, softer than you might hope for feeling. Nevertheless, this is a $400 sword with a scabbard. A scabbard that matches, that has detail on it, that's sewn, that has risers. The fact that it comes with a scabbard is great. Assumably, the scabbard is also going to fit and be more useful than it is in this particular case. So while I'm nitpicking some of these things, I do want to mention that $400 with a scabbard is a great deal if you haven't gotten that vibe from me yet. Anyway, So the Scabbard has the leather anyway. I would love to see a different leather. At the same time, if it would raise the price hundreds of dollars, then I would not. This is still sufficient. It doesn't have a belt system or anything with it. That might be something that could be added. There are other details here that are worth noting, though. The top rain flap is stitched. The mouth of the Scabbard, if you look in, doesn't have anything to really clean up the wooden area there, so you can see the wood pretty easily. Again, not complaining given the price point. This little cross area appears to be like laser cut in. It almost looks like it's burned, but it's a nice detail to see. There are, again, little leather risers that are in here. They look not as well done as the risers in the Crossguard or in the grip on the hilt area, but they're here and offer maybe something to prevent the belt system that you might attach to it from sliding around too much. The back has a seam on it that is stitched. It looks like this could be stitched somehow differently. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the common way I've seen it done, but it's stitched on there and doesn't seem to move around, at least in the ways that I've used it. At the end, there's also a metal chape, which is excellent. I really like the metal chape. It feels solid. It feels like it's made of a different material than the Crossguard and pommel. It has a little cross adornment and some stippling on it. I really actually like the chape. One side of it sticks out just a little proud. It feels overall like a really solid thing, though, and is a wonderful little additional decoration to it. I think in a previous LK Chen video, they had a metal chape up here and it was too tight and caused, the blade to rub on the metal, which was bad. Overall, if this Scabbard fit, I would think, apart from the leather not necessarily being to my taste, it's still very, very pleasant looking. And it's also thin. It's not super thick. It, I suppose, could be thinner, but it's also not, it's not a giant bulbousy, dumb Scabbard, and it feels like it's actually solid. Like if I try to move it and twist it, sometimes the wood feels like it's made out of pallet wood or something, and I can twist it apart. But if I take this and really wrench on it, it's still solid, while at the same time not being too big. This is actually a pretty good Scabbard for the money, obviously, if it fit your sword. Now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, and there's a bit to unpack here. So in terms of blade type, I honestly forgot what style it is. I get lost in the oakshot typology, but it's a relatively long blade for an arming sword, and it's also rather wide, and it has a cutting profile that seems to work well, but it has a point on it that you could relatively easily thrust with. I don't think it's going to get through the rings and chainmail, but at the same time, it would certainly get through gambeson, or, if you're fighting unarmored, it would be quite devastating to be poked with it. Anyway, it is a fuller that runs roughly 3/5 of the way up the blade, and the fuller, incidentally, is terminated relatively evenly. Often on European swords, I kind of see them peter off in different directions or terminate in different spots. That's not the case here. The fuller terminates in a way that seems relatively symmetrical, and also the grind lines on it are clean. So there's some surface ripples, not a lot. Sometimes swords in the $400 price point that come with a Scabbard look like a stone was thrown into a pond and there's just ripples all over the surface. I don't see that here, though there are some, wavers in the lines just a little bit. It's not as clean as a katana might be, but in the realm of European swords, it's really quite good. The sword also has some decorations on it. There are 2 crosses kind of darkened on the surface. Unlike the Crossguard, where it was kind of recessed in, this is just darkened, so it has a slightly different texture to your finger, but at the same time, it's not like recessed into the blade. It'd be kind of nice if it was, but it's not necessarily a requirement. It also makes them a little bit harder to clean. Pockets of stuff tend to get in there, and it's a problem area for rust. A Balaur Arms logo is also etched in here on one side only. The blade also has no secondary bevel that I can make out. It kind of comes off from the fuller and then goes right down to the primary edge bevel. There's, again, no secondary edge bevel, and the edges are relatively clean. They don't have a lot of meat on them. It makes this sword really, really effective at cutting light targets. I was really surprised at how nice it worked. Now, in profile, this way, you can kind of see that it's a wide blade. It tapers down. It has some profile taper to it that appears relatively correct. I'm not an expert in medieval swords, but it doesn't seem like it's a refit Gion or something like that. It does look like a European style sword in width, and I could be wrong on that. If you know more, throw it in the comments. What surprises me, though, is that they actually got distal taper correct in this sword, or at least it has it present. Many of the medieval swords that I've handled have really thinned out to like 1 millimeter or less at the tip, and very rarely do reproduction swords seem to do that, to get them as thin as some of the historical swords were. And I'd imagine it's got a higher failure rate. I imagine people that go whack water bottles or tree branches in their backyard are rather displeased when the sword bends or breaks. But this one doesn't get quite to a millimeter, but it does get very, very thin, and it creates a sword that has the right profile. It has flex like some of the historical examples I've seen. It handles as well in a way that is absolutely delightful and that I usually don't like in reproductions of this sword type because they often feel stupid in the hands. This one just feels like an absolute delight. So I'll talk about that more with dynamics, but LK Chen is known to get the distal taper, that's the kind of the thickness and how it thins out towards the tip, correct in swords, and they've absolutely nailed it here, which is going to be part of the Balaur Arms design, but also the execution by LK Chen. This feels wonderful in the hand. It's sharp. It's a great sword. The blade is just absolutely excellently done. And I cut with it. I did some dumb things with it. I cut some branches with it, and overall it didn't bend. I threw some bad cuts its way. I got it stuck into tatami mats, and the sword flexed. It always sprang back to true. I didn't have any problems, and I didn't see any edge deformation. It's not tempered super hard, so you certainly could if you whacked enough wood or hit some metal, it would likely deform, but at the same time it's through hard and springs back to shape. You could probably not buff it out exactly, but maybe sharpen it out. Anyway, I'll talk about moving it around a little bit in the dynamics. Now, as I mentioned, the sword blade has been profiled in such a way where it gets very thin, and that creates a sword that is really, really lively in the hand. I tend to avoid swords that look like this Templar sword because they often feel cumbersome. In one hand, it's tough to get the point where I want it to. They often feel clubbish, they hurt my elbow, and they're not fun to move around. They're like big, long bars of steel that are more akin to crowbars often in the reproduction market than something lively that makes it feel like a weapon. And this absolutely nails that feeling. And I was just not expecting it from a $400 sword. When I picked this up, I feel like I can be very accurate with where I want to cut. I feel like I can thrust and I can put the tip where I want to, despite it being a very long one-handed sword. And there's no room to get a second hand on if I want to do anything with it. It's meant to be used in companion with a shield, but I feel like I can really get the tip where I want it to go. I feel like I can get the edge where I want it to go. It feels absolutely nimble and delightful in the hand. And it's the first time I've had a sword that looked like this and actually felt more akin to what I think it's supposed to feel like, which is not a dumb crowbar. I feel like I could guard with this. I feel like I could get the tip where I want to. I feel like I could cut precisely, not necessarily always getting a clean 45-degree angle, but I feel like I could get the edge where I want it to because I'm not fighting against it as a weapon. It feels like it wants to move where I want it to move. A delightful feeling that, again, I just was not expecting in a sword at this price point. So moving it around, such as it is, it moves really, really well, despite the fact it's a very long sword and it really can only be used with one hand, and it has that wheel pommel that often wants to fight the flow of my hand. It's delightful to move. I can move it, I can start it, I can stop it, I can swing it hard, I can stop it in a controlled way. I can put the tip, I can put the point, I can put the edge, I can put it all where I want it to go, and I can do it kind of slow, I can do it fast, and I can control it. Just not something, again, I've had in a sword that looks like this kind of Templar sword, this kind of classic cruciform, single-handed sword. Usually they just feel dumb in the hand, and that was not the case here. This was very, very fun. In terms of cutting, it cut really well. I whacked the edge of water bottles, I hit my stand, it always returned to true. It didn't, it moves around and it wiggles a little bit, but it always returns to true. It's also not whippy, so if I shake the sword, the tip is not like sagging under its own weight. When I swing it, it doesn't lean or something like that. It's preserving its shape when I swing it. But it does deform and kind of flex and move around. At least that's what the camera's showing when I cut stuff. Always returning back to true, but it doesn't seem to like impact my edge angle. I don't have to think about how the sword's going to bend if I swing it hard. It's not, well, it's thin. It's not so thin that it loses its kind of rigidity in the cut or deforms in the cut. It does in the cut, not in the swing. That's what I meant. But it does cut very effectively. I also cut a tatami mat with it. I didn't cut a lot of the tatami. I was kind of being cheap because I'm going through some stuff right now where I have limited availability of tatami and I need it for practicing because I have some testing coming up. I was trying to be cheap and only use one tatami with this as well as a glaive I was testing at the time. And this cut really, really well on the tatami. I gave it some bad cuts. I gave it some limp-wristed cuts. It really cuts deeply. It cuts very effectively. It's easy to draw out. It's very easy to swing it in accurately at what you're trying to do. And I also tried some cuts that I don't normally do with swords anymore, but like an over the head, they call it a redondo in Filipino martial arts, but over the head cut, and it cut very deeply. I wasn't able to cut the tatami mat in two, but I haven't practiced this cut in years, and I'm non-familiar with this sword, so I was very impressed that it cut as deeply and effectively as it did with the kind of weird stuff that I was trying to do on a tatami mat. But with a simple downward diagonal cut, it was a laser beam of a cutter. In my haste, I forgot one very important factor about this blade that is enormously fun. Yes. All right, sword friends, you've seen close-ups of the bits and bobs and fits and features. I've talked about moving it. I've talked about cutting with it, and hopefully you have enough information to make a decision on if it's worth your $400 or not. And for me personally, it's an absolute yes. I generally do not like this style of sword, and this one made me like it again. I was delighted when I picked this up and moved it around. It put a smile on my face, and just it's a magic and fun feeling sword. If you don't like this kind of sword usually, go buy one of these anyway. It is a really solid feeling sword. I'd be cautious about buying them secondhand. You want to make sure you get the variant from LK Chen. They seem to hit the nail on the head, but it's absolutely a wonderful feeling sword. And even though I'm not generally drawn to this typology, this style, knowing what I know now, I would absolutely recommend it and go buy it. It is an absolute delight. But little things I did want to mention, I've compared it to other swords, but not really as effectively as I could. So as I go up the food chain and I compare it to an Albion, is it as good as an Albion? No, it's not. The grip is not as good. The grind lines are not as good. But it is in the running. Like it's a contender for an Albion, and Albions are far more expensive. Are they better? Yes. The dimension, the design, the way the hilt feels, the way it locks into your hand, the dimension of the pommel, all the little things that I complained about in this sword, I think are really generally addressed in an Albion. And I had a knight handy, so I brought that out, and you can kind of see, compare and contrast a little bit to it. But it's a lot closer to an Albion than many of the others. And going up to a sword that is more than twice its price is not necessarily fair. So looking at things that may be a little bit more comparable, I have a Dark Sword Armory sword. The Dark Sword Armory is shinier. The pommel and furniture feel like they're made of a little more stable metal. The grip is assembled in a way that's a little prettier. The seam is better done on the LK Chen. The leather feels better on the Dark Sword Armory. The hilt has a better crossguard gap on the LK Chen. The Dark Sword Armory has a little bit more panache, and it's shinier, and I like the design maybe a little bit more. But the LK Chen has a scabbard that I don't think feels as good as the Dark Sword Armory, but the LK Chen is probably a little bit more historically accurate, and also the blade profile on the LK Chen feels amazing, and the one on the Dark Sword Armory feels more robust, like a backyard beater. It feels much more cumbersome in the hand. By contrast, some others, I have a Fidesz longsword. It's not the same thing, but it's a great example of how Chinese sword manufacturers generally make European-style longswords, in that it's wrapped with this kind of cord, and it doesn't necessarily hold up well, and it looks really big and bulbous, and it misses the mark. The LK Chen absolutely nailed the handle. The Fidesz sword is about half the price of the LK Chen sword, but you can see that there's a lot more attention to detail on the LK Chen. Balaur arms, I keep saying LK Chen, it's a Balaur arms sword, but the design from Balaur arms, the execution by LK Chen really put it more in line with a contender of Albion or some of the other higher end makers than others. So it's an incredible value, but also just a delightful sword. If it were twice the price, it would still be less expensive than an Albion, and still maybe a worthy contender for it. So I think it's an incredible value. It's also just a delight to move around. I have some other swords that I can compare it to, but basically the accuracy, how well it feels in the hand, is really the tip of the hat. It's a special kind of sword. It's especially special to me because, again, I don't like this kind of sword. I've held a number of them. Oftentimes they kind of hurt my hand, and I don't get particularly excited about doing them. I still like them, but it's like a Viking sword. Things that are hard for me to move and have fun with just don't have the sword magic that others do. But this one surprised me in that, despite it being the shape that I don't generally like and not being fun to swing, it is anything but. It is an absolute delight to move around. So tip of my hat to the folks at Balaur Arms for designing this, and tip of my hat at LK Chen for realizing it and making it a reality. It's a wonderful sword, and hopefully that explanation goes a little way, because I know it would be hard to convince me to buy this sword. It would be hard for me to say, like, yeah, it's just, I had some bad experiences with swords that kind of look like that. They don't generally feel the way that I'd like. If you get a chance to hold one of these, your eyes might be open like mine was. This is just so much fun to move around. They really hit it out of the park. yeah, I'm going to shut up now. That's it. That's why I think what I do. If you like this sword, this is going to be a great one. Go get it. If you don't like this sword, try it anyway. It's a must-have in any collection. It's incredible value as well. For cheap folks that want a really damn good sword for not a lot of money, $400 really gets you a lot in this pack. I said I was going to shut up, and then I didn't. I am going to now. Thank you to the folks at Cult of Athena for sending this my way. It's been a delight to test. I hope you guys found it interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.